The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Thorne Global Executive Boardroom. Julian Thorne, a man whose tailored suits and icy demeanor were legendary in the financial district, stared down at the sprawling city. The letter in his hand felt heavier than a block of lead. His late grandfather had left a bizarre stipulation in the will. Julian had 30 days to marry, or the controlling shares of the empire would bypass him entirely and fall into the hands of his resentful half-brother Elias. Julian crumpled the paper. He did not lose, and he certainly did not let himself be manipulated by a ghost. Clara Vance was not having a good week. As the newly hired personal assistant to the notoriously demanding Julian Thorne, her first day had culminated in spilling scalding coffee directly onto his imported leather shoes. Julian had been merciless, his words dripping with aristocratic disdain. But Clara had simply stood her ground, her chin held high, and told him that if he placed his shoes where people walked, he should expect collateral damage. Julian had stopped, stunned by the sheer defiance in her eyes. It was in that moment of tense silence that a reckless idea formed in his mind. She was immune to his wealth, unintimidated by his name, and clearly despised him. She was the perfect candidate for a business arrangement. The contract was drawn up by the end of the week. Clara had stared at the obscene amount of money offered for a year of pretending to be his wife, and against all her instincts, she signed. She had debts to pay, secrets to protect. The wedding ceremony was a cold, sterile affair in a judge's chambers. Julian wore a blank expression, and Clara wore a simple dress she had bought off the rack. As they exchanged hollow vows, Elias watched from the back of the room, his eyes narrowed with venomous suspicion. This sudden romance was too convenient, and Elias was determined to tear it apart. Life in Julian's sprawling penthouse was a battlefield of quiet defiance. Clara refused to be molded into a trophy wife. When Julian ordered his staff to fill her closet with designer gowns, she left them untouched, wearing her own modest clothes. When he tried to hand her a limitless credit card, she left it on the kitchen counter, preferring to buy her own cheap coffee instead of drinking his rare imported roasts. But beneath the bickering and the clashing of their strong wills, a strange shift began to happen. One evening, after a grueling day of fending off aggressive investors, Julian found Clara asleep on the library sofa, a stack of corporate reports resting on her chest. Moving with a quiet gentleness he did not know he possessed, he draped a cashmere blanket over her shoulders, lingering just a moment to brush a stray lock of hair from her face. The fragile peace shattered during the annual Thorne Global Charity Gala. The ballroom was packed with the city's elite when Elias took the stage, interrupting the orchestra. With a cruel smile, he announced he had a wedding gift for the happy couple, projecting a dossier onto the massive screens behind him. A collective gasp echoed through the room. The documents revealed that Clara Vance was actually Clara Sterling, the vanished heiress of the Sterling Enterprise, a company that Julian's grandfather had ruthlessly dismantled and absorbed a decade ago. The whispers grew into a roar. Julian felt the air leave his lungs. He dragged Clara into a private antechamber, his eyes blazing with betrayal. He accused her of planning a long game of revenge, of infiltrating his life to destroy his family's legacy. Clara did not scream or cry. She looked at him with a quiet, devastating pain, telling him that she had lost her family, her home, and her name because of his empire, and that the only reason she took the contract was to pay for her ailing mother's medical care. The truth hung between them, heavier than the lies. For weeks, the penthouse became a tomb. They lived as ghosts, passing each other in the hallways without a word. Julian buried himself in his work, but the silence at home was deafening. He realized he missed the sound of her laughter, her sharp retorts, the way she challenged him. He started leaving her favorite pastries on the kitchen counter before he left for work. He cancelled a lucrative dinner meeting in Tokyo just so he could fly back early and sit quietly in the same room as her. But the distance remained, a chasm built on pride and hurt. Sensing weakness, Elias made his final move. He convened an emergency board meeting, presenting falsified documents that not only proved the marriage was a fraudulent scheme, but also framed Julian for massive corporate embezzlement. Elias demanded Julian be stripped of his title and expelled from the company. As the board members murmured in agreement, the heavy oak doors swung open. Clara walked in. her head held high, radiating the quiet power of the sterling name. She dropped a thick folder onto the mahogany table. It contained a digital trail of Elias's offshore accounts, undeniable proof that Elias himself had forged the documents and had been siphoning company funds for years. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Elias turned pale, stammering and backing away toward the door, but corporate security was already waiting. Police officers stepped into the room, snapping handcuffs onto Elias's wrists. He was dragged out, screaming threats and cursing Julian's name, thoroughly humiliated in front of the very people he had tried to manipulate. Later that night, the penthouse was quiet, but the air felt entirely different. Julian found Clara standing on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. He stepped up beside her, the cold armor of the billionaire completely stripped away. He apologized, his voice rough with emotion, not just for the misunderstanding, but for everything his family had taken from hers. He told her that he did not want a contract, he did not want a fake arrangement, and he did not want a life where she was not by his side. Clara turned to him, the lingering shadows in her eyes melting away as she saw the raw honesty in his face. She reached out, her hand resting against his chest, and finally allowed herself to lean into his embrace. Years later, the skyline of the city featured a new addition. The gleaming headquarters of Thorn and Sterling United stood as a testament to a fractured past that had been beautifully rebuilt. Julian and Clara stood side by side in the lobby, holding hands as they watched the ribbon-cutting ceremony for a new initiative supporting small family businesses. They shared a soft, knowing smile, the ghosts of the past finally put to rest, ready to face whatever the future held, together. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear a good love story. Subscribe to the channel to follow our next stories. See you next time. The clinking of crystal glasses and the low murmur of wealthy men filled the private lounge of the Vale Maritime Club. Adrian Vale sat slumped in a leather armchair, a cynical smirk playing on his lips as his supposed friends discussed the upcoming international summit. Benedict, a man whose inherited wealth had bought him nothing but arrogance, leaned forward and proposed a cruel wager. He bet Adrian that he could not take a woman from the absolute bottom of the social ladder and pass her off as a high society bride by the time the summit arrived. Adrian, fueled by equal parts boredom and a toxic sense of invincibility, accepted the bet without a second thought. He was a man who conquered oceans and markets. Manipulating a stranger would be child's play. The universe seemed to provide his target almost immediately. Long after midnight, as Adrian walked through the deserted lobby of his own corporate tower, he encountered Sienna Hayes. She was on her knees, wearing the drab uniform of the night cleaning crew, fiercely scrubbing a stain from the imported marble. When Adrian carelessly stepped over the wet floor, leaving a scuff mark with his expensive shoe, Sienna did not cower. She stood up, her eyes blazing with exhaustion and dignity, and sharply reprimanded him for making her job harder than it already was. Adrian was taken aback. Instead of firing her, he offered her a sum of money so astronomical it sounded like a joke, on the condition that she play the role of his devoted fiancée for the next 2 months. Sienna wanted to throw the mop water at him, but the mention of the money stopped her cold. She signed the airtight non-disclosure agreement the very next morning, refusing to show any intimidation when she was ushered into his sprawling coastal estate. From the start, she made it clear she was an employee, not a toy. When Adrian's sharp-tongued ex-fiancée, Vanessa Roth, paid an unexpected visit and tried to mock Sienna's unpolished manners, Sienna fired back with a calm, cutting observation about Vanessa's desperate need for attention. Adrian watched the exchange with a strange twist of admiration. He had expected a docile pawn, but he had hired a warrior. Their forced proximity began to chip away at the walls they had both built. One evening, after hours of grueling etiquette lessons designed to turn her into a flawless socialite, Sienna collapsed on the library sofa, shivering from a sudden fever. Adrian, usually repulsed by weakness, found himself kneeling beside her. He wiped her brow with a cool, damp cloth, ordered his private chef to make soup, and sat in the quiet room until she fell into a peaceful sleep. The cold, calculated bet began to feel like a heavy stone in his chest, especially when he realized how fiercely she protected her private life, vanishing for hours every weekend and refusing to answer his calls during those times. The truth shattered his arrogant worldview on a rainy Tuesday. Adrian had hired an investigator to look into her weekend disappearances, suspecting corporate espionage. Instead, he received a file containing photographs of Sienna at a children's hospital. She had a 4-year-old son who was born with a severe congenital heart defect. The obscene amount of money from their fake engagement was the exact amount needed for a highly specialized, life-saving surgery. Adrian sat in his office, the photographs trembling in his hands, completely overwhelmed by the realization of her sacrifice and his own cruelty. Guilt made him clumsy. He approached her that night, offering to pay for the surgery immediately, completely bypassing the contract. But his delivery was cold, sounding more like a payoff to clear his conscience than an act of genuine care. Sienna was furious. Her pride deeply wounded, she accused him of trying to buy her dignity and reduce her son's life to a mere transaction on his ledger. She withdrew from him entirely. The house grew vast and empty. They played their parts perfectly in public, smiling for the cameras, but behind closed doors, the silence between them was a punishing, agonizing void. Adrian could only watch her from afar, secretly arranging for the best pediatric cardiac team in the country to take over her son's case without her knowing. The international summit finally arrived, a glittering sea of diamonds and deceit. Vanessa Roth had not been idle. She had pieced together the strange circumstances of the engagement and discovered the original bet made in the private lounge. She cornered Adrian and Sienna in the grand foyer, her face twisted into a vicious smile. Vanessa loudly declared she was going to take the microphone and expose them both, painting Sienna as a desperate gold digger and Adrian as a heartless fraud, ensuring that neither of them would ever show their faces in polite society again. But Adrian was no longer the bored billionaire who had made that foolish wager. Before Vanessa could reach the stage, Adrian intercepted her in front of the entire ballroom. He connected his phone to the main audio system, playing a recording his investigator had intercepted. Vanessa's own voice echoed through the massive speakers, caught in a vile phone call where she attempted to bribe a hospital administrator to drop Sienna's son from the surgical priority list just to cause Sienna pain. The ballroom erupted in gasps of horror. Vanessa stood frozen, the color draining from her face as her influential friends and investors physically backed away from her. The media descended, and within minutes she was entirely ruined, her reputation destroyed by her own malice. Adrian did not stay to watch her fall. He followed Sienna out into the cool night air. Stripped of his pride, he stood before her and confessed everything. He told her about the disgusting bet, his profound regret, and the agonizing realization that he was deeply, irrevocably in love with her. He begged for her forgiveness, promising nothing but his unwavering devotion. Sienna looked at him, seeing not the arrogant CEO she had met in the lobby, but a man who had finally learned the value of a human heart. She reached out, her fingers gently tracing the line of his jaw, and told him that the contract was officially void, but their life together was just beginning. Months later, the oppressive skyline of the city was a distant memory. Adrian had stepped down from Vale Maritime, leaving the corporate warfare behind. They stood on the wooden deck of a modest coastal home in a quiet seaside town, the salty breeze blowing through their hair. Adrian smiled as Sienna's son, healthy and full of energy, ran along the shoreline chasing seagulls. They had opened a small, honest charter boat business, trading boardrooms for open water. As Adrian wrapped his arms around Sienna, pulling her close against his chest, they watched the sun dip below the horizon, finally free, finally home. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear a good love story. Subscribe to the channel to follow our next stories. See you next time. The flashes of camera lenses reflected in the glass walls of the Kane Enterprises skyscraper, a constant reminder of the media circus surrounding the recent corporate scandal. Sebastian Kane, a man who navigated the treacherous waters of the tech industry with ruthless precision, paced the length of his office. His aggressive acquisition strategies had spooked the conservative board of directors, and his ambitious business partner, Elliot Graves, was circling like a shark, suggesting Sebastian step down. To secure his position as CEO, Sebastian needed to present an image of stability and maturity. He needed a respectable, grounded relationship, an undeniable proof that he was a family man, capable of steady leadership. But Sebastian despised the socialites of his circle, finding them as hollow as the champagne flutes they carried. For weeks, under the guise of an ordinary software manager, he had been exchanging messages on a modest dating application with a woman named Lila Monroe. Her sharp wit and utter lack of pretense had become his only escape from the suffocating corporate warfare. When he finally arranged to meet her at a quiet, run-down diner on the edge of the city, he expected a pleasant evening. He did not expect the fierce, radiant woman who slid into the booth across from him, immediately teasing him for wearing a suit that cost more than her car. He also did not expect the crushing wave of guilt when he revealed his true identity. Lila stared at him, the warmth draining from her eyes. She started to walk away, but Sebastian stopped her, offering a heavily compensated ironclad contract to pose as his devoted fiancée for 6 months to save his company. Lila needed the money. Her savings were depleted, her rent was months overdue, and she was desperate to fund her own independent coding project. She accepted the arrangement with a cold, professional nod, treating him not as a suitor, but as an employer. Moving into his minimalist, heavily guarded mansion, she refused to let his wealth define her. When Sebastian had his assistant deliver a wardrobe of haute couture dresses to her room, Lila sent them all back, attending his high-profile events in vintage dresses she tailored herself. During a suffocating charity dinner, Elliot Graves cornered her, making a snide comment about her simple jewelry. Lila smiled sweetly and replied that she preferred things with genuine value over cheap, shiny distractions, leaving Elliot speechless and Sebastian hiding a smirk of genuine admiration. The lines of their business arrangement began to blur in the quiet moments of the night. Sebastian found himself seeking her out, abandoning his late-night meetings just to sit on the kitchen counter while she rambled about her code. One evening, Lila came down with a vicious migraine, the stress of the public scrutiny finally taking its toll. Sebastian, a man who usually delegated care to his staff, sent everyone away. He sat in the dark with her for hours, pressing a cold compress to her forehead and softly reading to her from a battered paperback she had left on the table. The walls of pride and detachment they had built were crumbling, revealing a profound unspoken tenderness. The illusion shattered during a televised press conference intended to announce their upcoming wedding. A prominent tech journalist stood up, armed with leaked documents, and asked Sebastian how he could marry the very woman his company had destroyed. The journalist revealed that Lila Monroe was not just a civilian. She was a brilliant former developer for Kane Enterprises, who had been unjustly fired a year ago, her groundbreaking algorithm stolen, and her professional reputation ruined. The room erupted into chaos. Sebastian looked at Lila, his heart hammering against his ribs, searching her face for a denial. But Lila only looked away, tears of humiliation shining in her eyes. They retreated to the mansion, the silence between them thick and suffocating. Lila confessed that she had not known he was the CEO when they met on the app, but once he revealed his identity, she took the contract to secure the funds needed to rebuild the career his company had stolen from her. Sebastian was devastated, not by her secret, but by the suffering his blind ambition had caused. He did not yell or accuse her. Instead, he withdrew, leaving her alone in the massive house. But he did not abandon her. He began leaving her favorite takeout on her desk, bringing her rare coding manuals without a word, and spending his nights ruthlessly tearing through the company archives to find the truth about her termination. Elliot Graves seized the opportunity. He called an emergency meeting of the board, painting Sebastian as an unstable liability, who was sleeping with a disgruntled former employee to silence her. Elliot demanded Sebastian be removed immediately, grinning with the triumphant satisfaction of a man who had finally won the throne. The board members were murmuring their agreement when the heavy doors of the conference room swung open. Sebastian walked in, his expression completely unreadable, with Lila walking proudly by his side. Sebastian dropped a heavily encrypted hard drive onto the table. He calmly explained that he had tracked the digital footprint of the stolen algorithm directly to Elliot's private servers. It was Elliot who had fired Lila to cover his tracks, and Elliot who had leaked the story to the journalist to orchestrate Sebastian's downfall. The evidence was irrefutable. The smug satisfaction drained from Elliot's face, replaced by sheer panic as the board members turned on him with furious disgust. Elliot was stripped of his shares, escorted out of the building by security, and left to face the incoming federal fraud charges, completely alone. When the dust settled, Sebastian and Lila stood alone in the empty boardroom. Sebastian stepped forward, stripping away the cold, calculating persona of the billionaire CEO. He apologized for the blindness of his past and the arrogance of his present. He told her that he was terminating their fake contract effective immediately because he refused to tie her to him with anything less than genuine, unconditional love. Lila looked up at him, the defensive walls around her heart finally breaking down. She saw the truth in his eyes, the absolute devotion of a man who had fought for her honor. She reached up, pulling him down into a kiss that erased every lie and every shadow between them. A year later, the tech industry was buzzing with the launch of a revolutionary new software company. Lila stood at the front of a crowded auditorium, confidently presenting her own finished algorithm to the world. Sebastian stood in the front row, not as her boss or her benefactor, but as her proudest supporter and devoted husband. As the crowd erupted into applause, Lila met his gaze, her smile brighter than any camera flash. They had navigated the darkest corners of deception and corporate greed, and emerged together, building an empire founded entirely on truth. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear a good love story. Subscribe to the channel to follow our next stories. See you next time.
Editor. The infographic reveals that the three stories are not simply fantasies about wealthy men falling in love. They are emotional studies of power, inequality, wounded pride, and the difficult journey from control to genuine human connection. Julian and Clara begin with a marriage contract created to protect a corporate empire. Adrian and Sienna enter a false engagement because of a cruel social wager and a desperate medical need. Sebastian and Lila agree to perform a relationship to stabilize his public image and finance her future. In every case, love begins as a transaction, but the arrangement exposes the hidden fears and moral failures of everyone involved. The men initially use money as a form of control. Their wealth allows them to solve problems quickly, command employees, shape public narratives, and avoid emotional vulnerability. Julian believes a contract can protect his inheritance. Adrian believes money can transform a cleaner into a convincing socialite. Sebastian believes a paid engagement can repair his reputation. Yet their confidence hides emotional fear. They are comfortable controlling companies, but they are unprepared for women who challenge them, reject their luxury, and refuse to surrender their dignity. The women enter these arrangements from positions of economic vulnerability, but they are never emotionally weak. Clara needs money for her mother while carrying the pain of a destroyed family legacy. Sienna is fighting for her son's life and accepts humiliation only because healthcare has become impossibly expensive. Lila needs the resources to rebuild the career that corporate corruption stole from her. Their decisions reflect real social pressures involving debt, medical costs, job insecurity, and class inequality. The stories show how financial desperation can limit a person's choices without erasing personal strength or moral agency. Each relationship follows the same emotional progression. It begins with a transaction, moves into conflict, reaches a painful revelation, demands accountability, and only then becomes capable of real love. The revelations are important because they destroy the false image each couple has created. Hidden identities, secret children, stolen work, family crimes, and cruel bets force the characters to confront the truth. Betrayal activates anger, shame, and distrust, but it also creates the possibility of change. The men do not earn forgiveness through wealth or dramatic declarations alone. They begin to change through consistent acts of care. Julian leaves Clara's favorite pastries and investigates the injustice committed against her family. Adrian protects Sienna's son and publicly exposes Vanessa's cruelty. Sebastian uncovers the theft of Lila's algorithm and risks his own position to restore her reputation. These actions transform money from a weapon of control into a resource for protection and repair. The villains represent systems built on manipulation, entitlement, and public humiliation. Elias, Vanessa, and Elliot attempt to exploit secrets and destroy reputations for personal gain. Their downfall satisfies the audience because it restores moral balance. Cruelty is exposed, courage is rewarded, and the people who were treated as disposable regain their voices. The central lesson is that love cannot survive as ownership. Consent matters even when an agreement is legal. Secrecy weakens trust, humiliation leaves emotional scars, and apologies have value only when they are followed by responsibility. The relationships become real when pride gives way to empathy and when both people are finally seen as equals. These stories resonate because they transform powerful men into vulnerable human beings and socially overlooked women into agents of justice and change. They offer the fantasy that broken relationships, damaged families, and corrupt institutions can be rebuilt through honesty, accountability, and compassion. Their deepest message is that genuine love does not grow from contracts, status, or control. It grows when people choose to understand one another, repair the harm they caused, and create a future based on mutual respect.